Hello, I'm Dr. Brandon Gillette. I'm your instructor for Philosophy 100. Welcome to the first supplementary lecture. Every now and then I feel like the reading undercovers or leaves out something that I feel like is pretty important. And so when that happens, I decide the fastest and easiest way to handle that is just to record one of these. And so you'll be seeing a few of these throughout the course. This first one concerns the topic of the truth. Uh, and it's because in this first unit, you're going to learn some very, very important concepts, specifically the concept of an argument, validity, and soundness. And students typically have troubles with validity. They sort of think they get it, and they sort of don't write it first until they work through it for a while. And much of the trouble comes because the definition of validity and the definition of soundness both heavily involve the word true. And the text takes it for granted that people, in fact, know what it means for something to be true. And in reality, most people get the word truth or the concept of truth confused with a lot of other different things. And so, if we want to be straight about validity and soundness, we first have to get straight about the meaning of the word true. And actually, it's very, very simple. Uh, since this is a philosophy course, you probably expected to be talking about the truth, but we're actually going to, settle the actual truth in about 20, 30 minutes. It's not any more complicated a concept than that. The trouble is that people often then, as I said, confuse it with other things. So one of the ways I like to illustrate what truth is and what it isn't is by playing this game called What Makes It True, and I'll show you how it goes. And it's actually not really much of a game. The way it works is this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a sentence, and then you're going to tell yourself. You go ahead and talk to your computer. It's really okay. I can't hear you, but it's super okay. Uh, I'm going to show you a sentence, and you're going to tell me, all right, what would make that sentence true, or also what would make that sentence false? Right? True and false are opposites here. Let's start with an easy. The sentence is the cat is on the mat. Under what conditions is that sentence true? And under what conditions is that sentence false? Think about it for a minute, answer the question. Of course, what makes the sentence true is if the cat is on the mat. When you say the cat is on the mat and the cat is on the mat, you have said something true. When the cat is not on the mat, you have said something false. That's really all there is to it. That's the entire concept of truth. It doesn't actually get any more complicated than that, but of course, people like to make it complicated. Particular kind of a sentence, right? The cat is on the mat. Notice it can move from being true to false and back again. When the cat is on the mat, it's true. When the cat moves, it's false. The cat goes back on the mat, it's true again. Right? Most sentences are that way. They're what we call contingent, right? The truth doesn't have to be sort of ultimate and timeless or anything like that here. All you mean by the truth is when your claim, your sentence, matches the way things actually are. That's really all it is. So let's try another example here. This is the sentence, the moon is made of cheese. Under what conditions is this sentence true? And under what conditions is this sentence false? All right. So, of course, we can just simply follow the pattern from the last one, say, well, the sentence is true if the moon actually is made of cheese. So if the moon is made of cheese and I say the moon is made of cheese, I have said something true. Of course, I've said something false if I say the moon is made of cheese and it isn't, right? And so that's, again, all there is to the. Now, this is one of these that is actually just like the sentence, the cat is on the mat, in the sense that it could be true or it could be false. And so, despite the fact that the sentence has, as far as we know, always been false, that doesn't mean there are not conditions under which the sentence would be true. Namely, if the moon really were made out of cheese, if it was just a big hunk of brie or Emmentaler or Gouda or Munster or something like that, any of the above, it would be a true sentence. The moon would be made of cheese. The fact that it isn't is, means that that sentence happens to be false. But now we consider one of the first kinds of things that people often really get confused here. So consider this sentence. There is a can of Dr. Pepper floating in space farther away than any human will ever see. So think about it for a second. What would make this sentence true, and what would make it false? Under what conditions is it true? Under what conditions is it false? Again, we follow the pattern. The sentence is true when there is such a can of Dr. Pepper, and it's false when there isn't. And either there is or there isn't, floating out in space. A can of Dr. Pepper further away than anyone will ever detect. So here's the thing. One of the concepts that people do very often confuse is the concept of truth and the concept of belief. Just because something is true doesn't mean that anybody believes it. Okay, and just because people believe something doesn't actually mean it is true. What somebody believes has no necessary connection to what is or is not true. Things can be true even if nobody or everybody thinks so, and things can be false even if nobody or everybody thinks so. Right. So this is the first really big thing about the truth that has to be learned fast, is that the truth is mind independent. Right. If there were no people, there would still be truths. Right. The world would still just be a certain way, and that's all that it means for something to be true. And so oftentimes people talk about something being true for one person or true for another, or people having their own truths. And this is a misuse of language. And so we're going to be not doing that. A belief refers to the content of somebody's mind. It's something that's in a mind, something that's true. That's outside of a mind. That's out in the world. So now a couple of other sentences. First, the sentence, all crows have black feathers. Again, what makes it true and what makes it false? It's true when all crows do in fact have black feathers, and false when at least one does not. This is something interesting about statements that begin with the word all, is that it's much easier to demonstrate the falsity of the sentence than to demonstrate its truth. For the truth of the sentence, you're going to need to have all crows. You're going to need to show that they all have black feathers. But to illustrate the falsity of the sentence, all you have to find is one crow that does not have black feathers. Much easier there. And so the truth conditions are a little asymmetric with a sentence of that kind. And same with this one. No teenagers are voters. And of course, what makes it true? What makes it false? It is true when no teenagers are voters, and false when at least one is. And again, notice how much easier it is to show that the sentence is false than to show that it is true. And so all and none statements are much easier to show that they're false than it is to show that they're true. It requires much more evidence, or really the totality of evidence, to show that it's true, and only one piece of evidence to show that it's false. And that's something that we know about these sentences, but it's worth highlighting. On the opposite end of that spectrum are particular sentences like this one. Some burglars pole vault. Again, what makes it true? What makes it false? Well, look, the sentence is true if even one burglar pole vaults, right? Then it's true that some burglars pole vault, right? And so some, in logical terms, means at least one. And of course, this one is false when no burglar pole vault. And so for sentences like this one, notice how much easier it is to show that this statement is true than to show that it is false. Right? A single case demonstrates the truth of the claim, whereas it would take the totality of all cases to demonstrate its falsity. Right? And again, this is something we know about sentences of this kind, but it's worth pointing out and worth taking notice of when you see them later. Consider the sentence, all triangles have three sides. Again, what makes it true and what makes it false? And if you're following the pattern and continuing to say, the what you ought to be saying at this point, you say that it's true when all triangles have three sides, and it's false when at least one triangle does not have three sides. And you might think to yourself, what sense does that make? It can't be a triangle unless it has three sides. And so when the falsity conditions and the falsehood conditions are literally incoherent or literally nonsense, then you're dealing with a kind of sentence that is what we call necessarily true. Another term for this is we call it a tautology. Okay? It's something it's a statement that literally can't be false. Its falsity condition is absurd. And usually these are things that are true by definition in some sense. Consider this sentence, no mothers are female. Again, what would make it true? What would make it false? If no mothers are female. And that seems incoherent in the same way as it seems like you could say, oh, there could be at least one triangle that doesn't have three sides. Because, mothers are, at least by definition, in the biological sense, female. Um, and so the statement is false when at least one mother is female. And the sentence is what we call necessarily false because its falsehood condition is fulfilled by definition. Okay, by the definition of a mother as a female parent. All right, now we get to the portion that people tend to find tricky, but it's actually just as easy as everything else. Consider the statement, I like fries. Again, what makes it true and what makes it false? Don't overcomplicate it. It's true when the speaker, that is the I in the sentence, likes fries. If I say I like fries and I actually do like fries, then I have said something true. And if I say I like fries and I don't, I have said something false. That's all. But I want you to notice that this is a statement about the speaker of the sentence and not a statement about fries. No actual content of fries is involved at all in determining whether that sentence is true or false. The question is about the speaker of the sentence. That's what that statement is about. Contrast that with this sentence. Fries are the best food. Again, what makes it true and what makes it false? Now, if you're tempted to say something like, oh, well, that can't be either true or false, that's an opinion. We'll get to that one. This sentence is true when fries are the best food, and it is false when it is not the case that fries are the best food. Notice that this one is actually a statement about fries, not about the speaker of the sentence. When think of it this way: if you change the person who says "I like fries," that might change its truth status, right? One person says "I like fries" and they actually do; they're saying something true. Somebody else says "I like fries" and they don't; they're saying something false. Here, when you say fries are the best food, the statement is about fries. It doesn't matter who says it; it's either true or it isn't. The interesting thing about this particular kind of a claim is what we mean by the phrase best food, what actually makes something best food. Notice that's not a nonsensical thing that we can't get any kind of a handle on. There are all kinds of things that might make something a good food. It might be tasty, it might be nutritious, it might be any number of other things. In fact, if somebody wants to argue that fries are not the best food, they're probably going to argue against the nutritional value of fries. And that seems to be a perfectly sensible argument that a person could make. But beyond that, it doesn't really matter whether we ever agree or disagree or ever know the truth or falsity of a particular claim. It still has a truth or falsity. Then remember that truth is mind independent. If everybody agreed that fries were the best food, they could still all be wrong. If everybody thought that it was true that fries were not best food, well, they might be, and everyone could still be wrong about that. Everyone could disagree forever about whether fries were the best food or not, and whether they all agreed or whether they all disagreed has no bearing on the truth of the actual claim. When we're concerned with whether a claim is true or false, and it's controversial in some way, that is, that people disagree with it, what we do is we construct arguments. That's really what arguments are for, is to try and provide reasons to believe a particular kind of a claim or not to believe a particular kind of claim. Most important claims, most claims that anybody actually cares about, are claims that not everybody agrees about. And so it shouldn't be unusual that those things should actually, in fact, have truth values of some kind. So consider this one then. The Mona Lisa is a beautiful painting. So answer again, go and talk at your computer. What makes it true and what makes it false? Well, it's true when the Mona Lisa is a beautiful painting, and it's false when it isn't. This is the point at which many people will say something like, well, look, that's just an opinion and it's not a fact statement, therefore it can't be either true or false. And this is, you can't be entirely blamed for this. This is a thing that's very commonly taught at lower levels of education. And it's in a lot of ways very unfortunate because it mixes up a lot of key concepts. And so think of it this way. Uh, a a fact is supposed to be defined as something that is, like stated in a particular way, or that is, something that is true, or something that is timeless or universal, or something like that. Really, really, let's just say that a fact is something that is true. That's a reasonable definition of the word fact. Fact is something that is true. And then the way that an opinion is often defined as something that somebody thinks, or it's an evaluative claim of some kind, something that says something is good or bad, or various other things. Those are or described as beautiful or ugly or something like that. These are all keywords that people are taught to say, oh yeah, that makes something an opinion. Right? And the other key part of this teaching is that facts and opinions are not the same thing. Well, this distinction isn't really going to hold up. So, for example, say that if I say, I think that George Washington was the first president of the United States. Okay. Well, you want to say, well, that's an opinion because it's an I think sense. Well, but that sentence, of course, is a fact. It's true that I think that George Washington was the first president of the United States. And here's the other thing. If I simply say George Washington was the first president of the United States, you might say that's a fact. But notice, I also think that. I do think that George Washington was the first president of the United States. And so if that's the case, then if facts and opinions can't ever be the same, right, or nothing can be both a fact and an opinion, then that means that if you believe something, it literally cannot ever be true. Right? And that seems like nonsense, because it is nonsense. Uh, the problem works in the other way as well. Just because something is true, right? So something is a fact, like say, Abraham Lincoln was is on the $5 bill, something like that, right? Which is true. If that's true, that means that nobody can, in fact, think that Lincoln is on the $5 bill because it's a fact that he's on the $5 bill. And if you think something, that's an opinion. So, again, the trouble with this whole fact opinion distinction is that it doesn't make a lot of sense. It confuses a lot of things, and it especially confuses the notion of belief with the notion of truth. And so just keep them separate. Say a fact is something that is true, a belief is something that you think. Some of the things you think are true, and some of them aren't. Right? That's a much better way to look at it. And that includes sentences like the Mona Lisa is a beautiful painting. People think that that sentence is true. Some people do not. Well, either it is or it isn't. And people can argue about it, and people may not ever agree. That's not going to change the fact that what makes the sentence true is simply, look, if the Mona Lisa is a beautiful painting, then the sentence, the Mona Lisa is a beautiful painting, would have to be true, wouldn't it? And if the Mona Lisa was not a beautiful painting, then the sentence, the Mona Lisa is a beautiful painting, would have to be false. Not all sentences, of course, have properties like those before. Some sentences are not either true or false. Consider this one. Sentence, close the door. It is a grammatical English sentence. Notice it's an imperative, it's a command. It has no truth status, it's neither true nor false. The reason it is neither true nor false is because it makes no claims about the world, right? It says nothing about the world outside of us. It simply says close the door. And so someone says, well, yes, but what if the door is closed? Well, no, no, no. That makes the sentence the door is closed true, right? The sentence closed the door isn't going to be ever true or false. It's an imperative. It doesn't say anything about anything. Same here, right? The sentence "What's up, Doc?" is going to be neither true nor false because it doesn't say anything about it. It's an interrogative sentence, otherwise a question. Right? Make no claims about what is the case or not the case about anything. Same with this. Hooray for Biff. This is what we call an emotive sentence, and it makes no claims about what is the case or is not the case about anything, and it cannot be either true or false. So there's three kinds of sentences: imperatives, emotives, and interrogatives, right? Those are all sort of non-truth, they're sentences, right? They're made up of English words in a proper order, but they don't say anything about anything. Contrast those sentences with a sentence like this one, like abortion is morally permissible. And again, answer the question, go and say it at your computer. What makes the sentence true? What makes the sentence false? Well, it's true when abortion is morally permissible, and it's false when abortion is not morally permissible. Now you might say, well, but what makes something morally permissible? Well, that's a perfectly reasonable question. And if you want to know what sorts of things are often pointed to make things generally morally permissible or not, you should take ethics. That's Philosophy 203. And we take a whole semester study when things or what makes things morally permissible or not morally permissible. Notice in terms of the truth or falsity of the sentence, that's really all there is to it. Truth itself is a very, very simple and basic notion. And the complicated thing about it is simply not confusing it with other things. So notice, if we're going to treat sentences that have evaluative claims in them, claims about what is good, bad, fair, unfair, right, wrong, beautiful, ugly, etc., all as these opinion claims, claims that we just sort of shut our brains off and don't think about, don't talk about, and say, oh, that's just a thing that can't be really true or false. It means that really we have to ignore some very important kinds of claims. So imagine that the person that taught you the whole fact opinion distinction, if they later on were going over the school rules and says you should not hit your classmates, and you were to say, well, that's just like your opinion, man. Imagine how you might get. Imagine the reaction. And so equally, right? If we have a sentence like "It is unfair to discriminate against people on the basis of race," notice that. I mean, I think that people are saying something meaningful there. They're not simply, sort of. This isn't obviously a command. It's not a question. It's not an emotive sentence. It's a sentence about the world. It's a sentence about fairness and what it means in certain circumstances. And it's true if racial discrimination is unfair, and it's false if it isn't. So here's one last one for you. Right? Biff thinks the Vikings will win the next Super Bowl. What would make it true? What would make it false? This is a tricky one. Sentence is about what Biff thinks. Okay, so it's not about the Vikings at all. The sentence says Biff thinks the Vikings will win the next Super Bowl, and so it's true if Biff thinks that, and false if he doesn't. Right. So the moral of the story here is just pay very close attention to the actual sentence, what it actually claims, and if that claim is matched by the world, then the sentence is true. If that claim is not matched by the world, then the sentence is false. And that is all it means for something to be true or false.